The Trump administration is beginning to phase out the use of paper checks in tax filings, and it could impact more than 830,000 taxpayers and how quickly they get their refunds. So to talk about all this, we're joined now by Michael Linden. He is the Senior Policy Fellow at the Washington Center for Equitable Growth and also a former official at the OMB, the Office of Management and Budget under the Biden administration. Michael, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right, so let's get into the weeds here of economic policy. And this is a rare treat when we talk about economic policy. We're talking about something I think a lot of folks, at least I, can really wrap my head around, which is paper checks. It's tangible.
Yes.
Now the administration is starting to phase them out. Why?
Well, I think that in the long run, you can understand why we would want to move as a system to more electronic payments. More and more people have the ability to accept electronic payments. But in the meantime, it is going to mean some upheaval, some bumps in the road for people who were expecting a paper check. It comes at a particularly difficult moment for the Internal Revenue Service. This administration has cut more than 20,000 staffers from the IRS. So in addition to making some changes like phasing out paper checks, there are going to be fewer people at the IRS to handle consumer concerns, complaints, questions. So I think folks should be prepared for a bit of a bumpy tax season.
Let's talk about being prepared. If somebody is watching right now and they are somebody who typically uses a paper check, what should they be doing right now to make the process as streamlined as possible?
I wish I had great advice. What I was going to say is start early. Unfortunately, we're only about 2 weeks away from the deadline, 3 weeks away from the deadline. If you have a question, if you are concerned about receiving a paper check as a refund or any of the other changes that have been made to the tax system in the last year, there have been some big changes made to the tax system. I would reach out to the IRS as early as possible. Expect some longer wait times on the phone. But if you are concerned, I would reach out as quickly as possible. It might take a little bit of time to get an answer because of some of these cutbacks at the IRS. There's been other big changes here that people should be aware of as well, like the phasing out of direct file, which was a system that the administration cut, which would have allowed people to file their taxes for free without using a third-party system like, for example, H&R Block or TurboTax. That existed last year. It does not exist this year. So if somebody used that in a previous year, they will, and they're waiting, they will find it's not there this year.
Michael, let me ask you this, and maybe this is a ignorant question on my part, so if it is, forgive me. But at the core of this, what we're talking about is people who typically receive their refunds via paper check, right?
Yeah.
So what do you do if you're somebody who typically receives a paper check as a refund? You file your taxes, you expect to get a refund.
Yeah.
If you usually get it via paper check, you're not getting it via paper check this year. Where does it go?
Well, it's a good question. And to be totally honest with you, I don't have the exact answer because the administration needs to answer this question. My suspicion is that the paper checks will not be fully phased out this year. And here's the important thing that your viewers need to understand. If you are entitled to a refund, that's your money, and you are entitled to that refund. So if you're not getting it, you should pick up the phone and call the IRS, figure out whether or not they sent a paper check or didn't send a paper check, and if there is some alternative to receiving that paper check. Because again, that's your money that is you are entitled to. So it can't be that you just don't get it. It may take you a little extra legwork.
How many people, I'm looking at my notes here, we've got a figure that perhaps 800,000 plus people could be impacted by this. Is that the most accurate figure? How broad a swath of the population could feel the impacts of this?
Yeah, that sounds about right to me. I'd have to look at most recent data. 800,000 is a lot of people. Don't get me wrong. It's a relatively small percentage of Americans, right? Most people are going to get their refund electronically and have been getting their refunds electronically. So 830,000 Americans it's a lot of people, and like I said, every single American is entitled to the refund that they are owed. So whether you got that paper or electronic, but it is a relatively small slice. Roughly 150 million households file tax returns. So it's a pretty small number relative to all the people who file tax returns. But if you're one of those people, it doesn't feel small to you.
I would imagine we've spent some time talking about some of the potential challenges that some filers may face who perhaps were expecting a paper check refund and may run into some hiccups about that. I can imagine the Trump administration and the IRS would perhaps push back on this and say, look, at some point, we are moving into an era where a lot of banking and a lot of financial transactions are all done digitally or all done electronically. And at some point, this transition had to be made. And taxes get paid every year. I'd imagine they'd say there's no perfect time to do this. It had to be done. What would you say in response to that?
I don't totally disagree over time. And over time, we really have been moving away from paper checks. I think it's bad timing to do that in a year when so many other changes are happening to tax paying, like getting rid of direct file, like cutting the IRS by 20,000 employees, like making big changes to the actual tax policies that people have to pay this year. This year, we're living under a new tax code in many ways based on the law that was passed last summer. So I think it's pretty bad timing to make such a big change for those 830,000 people. At the same time, so much else is changing. That said, yes, of course, over time, that's going to fade out. That has to fade out. Paper checks are not the most effective or efficient way to return somebody's refund. But I do wish they hadn't done it in a year when there's just fewer people at the IRS there to handle concerns, confusion, or complaints.
All right, we are out of time. Michael Linden, the Senior Policy Fellow at the Washington Center for Equitable Growth. Michael, thank you for your time and your perspective. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me.